This is why some folks get angry when they're hungry. It's been a while since your last meal and you start to get irrationally irritable. We've all been there. Some people call it hangry. But what's the science behind that frustration? And is there anything other than eating all the time that you can do to stave it off? The first word came to prominence in the 1990s. As you might suspect, it's an amalgamation of hungry and angry. And in a roundabout way, there's an amalgamation of different processes in your body that cause that downturn in your mood. One of the main culprits is glucose, or rather, it's a lack of glucose. When you've eaten a meal, your body starts to break down the proteins, carbohydrates, and fats into three different things: amino acids, free fatty acids, and simple sugars. These three things then move into your bloodstream where they become energy, which is tapped into by your various organs. But in contrast to your heart, lungs, and liver, your brain is heavily reliant on glucose, one of the simple sugars, and if it starts to run low, your gray matter gets a little panicked. But how does that actually manifest itself? Well, when your glucose level starts to get low, you'll probably notice that things become a bit more challenging. You won't be able to focus as well, and your speech might become more and more garbled as your glucose levels get lower and lower. Basically, that's your brain getting into a muddle because it thinks you're going to die. Okay, that might sound a bit extreme, but the lower your blood glucose level gets, the more danger your brain starts to sense. And that level plummets the further you get away from your most recent meal. There's some hardcore science behind this. One study that looked into the drop of cognitive function related to blood glucose found that basic, easy tasks become increasingly arduous, but that the brain can keep focused on more complicated efforts. And that's particularly key in the hangry phenomenon. You see, it's often the little things that will set you off when you're having a particularly bad hangry episode. You might be able to keep everything in check when you're talking with your boss because your brain knows that that counts. But the people closest to you are far more likely to suffer your glucose-deficient wrath. And that's not the only study that's connected low glucose level with aggression. Another was performed with 107 married couples, and it got them to prick pins into voodoo dolls or bombard their partner with loud noises to show how angry they were with them. The results were pretty interesting. The research found that study subjects lodged more pins into their dolls and assaulted their spouse's eardrums with louder and more extended bursts of noise when their glucose levels were low. And if that weren't bad enough, glucose has a second role in your hunger rage. That's because when your glucose level is low, something called the glucose counter-regulatory response can kick in. That might sound like it'd be a helpful thing, but actually it makes things much worse. When the glucose in your blood descends below a specific level, your brain starts transmitting signals to a bunch of other organs to tell them to start releasing hormones that'll give that level a boost. Unfortunately, one of these hormones is far more likely to make you lash out, and that hormone is adrenaline. Yep, you're already in a bad mood, and now your body's releasing the fight or flight hormone to try and sort out your blood sugar. Much like when you're in a stressful situation, the odds of you screaming at someone just skyrocketed. And if that wasn't enough, genes are also at play here. When you're hungry, your brain releases a chemical called neuropeptide Y, which then reacts with a bunch of receptors in your brain, such as one dubbed the Y1 receptor. Almost inevitably, this can lead to complications. Yep, you guessed it, neuropeptide Y and the Y1 receptor govern anger as well as your feeding behavior. Essentially, it's a genetic throwback. If a species wasn't willing to fight to procure its food supply, then it wouldn't really survive that long. So what can you do to try and conquer that hangry beast that flies off the handle if you've missed a meal? Well, there are a couple of options, as well as some things that you definitely shouldn't do to keep your food fury at bay. One thing you should never do is binge on junk food. It might seem like a good idea at the time, but after a massive spike in your glucose levels, they'll take a nosedive pretty quickly afterwards. You need to be much smarter about what you eat and when you eat it. The key is eating at the right time, or before you get too hungry. And it's best to eat natural foods, especially ones chock full of nutrients, in order to stave off the worst symptoms of the phenomenon. You want to make sure that you're sated for as long as you can be. Sometimes, though, you're not going to be able to get food when you need it. Your body will eventually start making glucose, but as we've seen, that can exacerbate the problem. So what's the real key to quelling those pangs? The smartest move is to structure your day. We all have to make big decisions, but why not try making them after lunch? And if all else fails, just make sure you always have a banana, rich in potassium, within easy reach. and you'll be fine.